Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
I'm really delighted to be welcoming back our next guest. He joined us in the summer of last year to chat with you. We had a terrific hour with him. You were thrilled with him. Lots and lots of questions and comments coming in afterwards. I'm going to give you straight off the bat his website details because you can check him out now. He's at $vigilante.com. I'm sure we'll talk about that. He has described himself as an anarcho-capitalist, a libertarian and a freedom fighter against mankind's two biggest enemies as he sees them, the state and the central banks. And I agree with that. I couldn't agree with it more. And as I mentioned, he's also a founder of the Dollar Vigilante. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the programme. He's in Acapulco, Jeff Berwick. Jeff, welcome back. How are you?
Thank you, Richie. Always a pleasure to be on.
Well, thanks for coming back. Terrific when you were on last time. We probably shouldn't have left it as long because we had such a reaction, Jeff, when you were on the programme, to you being on the programme. So it's going to be a terrific hour. It's going to fly by. And, well, again, as with our first guest this evening, when it was announced earlier you were coming on, loads and loads and loads of questions for you. Tell us about this Acapulco event taking place in Acapulco next month, Jeff. What's going to be happening? What's the purpose of it? And what do you hope to achieve with it?
Well, I actually started when I'm a libertarian, I'm an anarcho-capitalist, anarchist, and I first started it because I'd been going to freedom conferences, mostly in the U.S., which I always found weird because it's one of the least free countries in the world today. And I always had a bad time. There was always closing hours at the bars. I couldn't smoke anywhere near the front door of a hotel. There was always cops harassing me, or actually many times I ended up in handcuffs. And so finally I said, well, if you're going to have a real freedom conference, and a real freedom conference would be an anarchist conference because that is true freedom. If you want true freedom, you don't want anyone to govern you. You don't want to govern anyone else. I decided to start in 2015 in Acapulco, and we called it Anarchapulco. And I was very surprised. It did very well. It actually sold out, which I was not expecting whatsoever. And so then we, of course, did it again this year. So it's coming up on February 19th to 21st in Acapulco, Mexico. It's going to be hundreds of people from around the world. It's truly international, all libertarian-minded, freedom-minded, wanting to change the world for the better, trying to create 7 billion governments on Earth instead of one government, which is the exact opposite, and is exactly evil compared to exactly good, which would be 7 billion governments. And many of your friends and my friends will be there, including people like Zen Gardner and Max Egan and Ken O'Keefe. So a lot of the people that are out there who are all anarchists, all wanting to change the world, all peacefully. We don't want to violently overthrow anything. We just want people to wake up and realize that government and the central banks, which there wouldn't be central banks without government, are mankind's two biggest enemies. And if we can get people to wake up to that and stop allowing themselves to be ruled, we can have a much more peaceful and prosperous world.
Terrific. It's about solutions. Yeah, I like the sound of it, Jeff. Of course, listeners want to know, those of us who can't afford to travel to be in the lap of luxury with Jeff Berwick over there in Acapulco, is there any chance this is going to be streamed so people can see it?
Well, first of all, I'd say if you can't afford it, you should get to work, be more productive, provide more value to society by creating services and products that are either cheaper or better than anyone else is doing right now. And that's why true capitalism is so great, is because all it does is provide people with what they want at a better price or a better quality than someone else can do. And so, but if you haven't gotten around to figuring out how you can provide more value to other human beings yet, we will probably be streaming some of it, and we'll probably be offering videos of the speeches and things at the event after the conference.
Sounds good, Jeff. I'm going to jump on you straight away. Be more productive and make better products than the ones that are already out there. But you and I both know, in theory, that's brilliant. But of course, in practice, you've got to go to a disgusting bank, a bank that was probably bailed out with governments, with money given to governments by another central bank. And in theory, those banks who were bailed out were supposed to recapitalise young, new, exciting entrepreneurs, but they're not doing it, Jeff. So where do you get the bloody money to start off one of these enterprises?
Well, you're exactly right that the banks in this fiat currency, government-backed currency system with central banking, is a massive deterrent to people being able to get ahead. It's actually designed to ensure that no one can ever, as a whole, ever get ahead, because all money created is actually debt. So they never create enough money to pay off the interest on that debt. It's actually a slavery system that really came into being in 1913 with the financial overthrow and takeover of the U.S. government by private central bankers, and still is to this day, and almost every country in the world is to this day, except for a few like Syria and Libya wasn't, and that's why they are attacking those countries. They want total control over the money system. So you're exactly right that this system is set up to destroy humanity, essentially, to not allow us to achieve anywhere near our ultimate potential. And that's why I'm totally against it. This system is absolutely atrocious. And you're seeing the results of it now in places like the U.S. They just came out and showed that the middle class is now not the biggest group in the U.S. It's actually, if you add up the total amount of wealthy people plus the amount of poor people, it's actually more than the middle class. And that was always sort of a mainstay of the U.S., which used to be semi-free for at least a while. And that's why they had so much prosperity. But because of the central banking system over time, it actually creates a very small percentage of people with a massive amount of money, which is what we're seeing today. I think it's something like 63 people in the world have more assets than 3 billion people, or more than that.
You're spot on, 3.5 billion, yeah.
Yeah, that's created by this system. That actually it actually pretty much wouldn't happen in a true free market system, because there would be competition, and also the people who were more poor wouldn't be constantly being stolen from through the hidden tax of inflation. So this whole system, that's why it is so absolutely evil, and you're totally right. It makes it very hard for people to get ahead.
Jeff, when you were on last, you and I spoke about the impending collapse of the financial system as we know it. And that's something I'm obviously very interested in. I think you're onto something. I think you might be right. You're not the only one who's been saying that. Anybody who watched the State of the Union address by the President of the United States, Barack Obama, he said, and I quote, and it's very interesting, anyone who says the American economy is in decline is peddling fiction, he said. They talked about, a sustained period of growth in the American economy. They talked about creating more jobs. It's actually, it's been echoed as this week in Britain. The Conservative Party are saying that there's record unemployment in the country. They're not telling people, of course, Jeff, that the jobs are worthless, that a lot of people are working in zero hours contracts jobs, where technically they're off the unemployed register, but in reality they often don't have work because it's a 0 hours contract, telling lies. So what did you make when you heard Obama say that the American economy isn't in decline, and anybody who says it is peddling fiction?
Well, I didn't watch it because I can't even stand to stomach watching things like that. It's so absolutely abhorrent to see the leader of the largest terrorist organization in the world trying to tell people what a great job he's doing. But yeah, peddling fiction about the U.S. economy not doing well is just typical lies from politicians. And one of the main things that he used or said about it was the unemployment rate is way down. Well, they actually fix all those numbers. Those numbers are massively manipulated. They changed them actually in the 1990s under Bill Clinton, and they took out essentially anyone who couldn't find a job after a while. They took them out. They said, oh, they just gave up. They're not interested in a job. Well, no, they're interested. They just can't find one. And they've massaged and manipulated those numbers ever since, to the point where it has no bearing on reality. So in the U.S. right now, they actually say the unemployment rate's around 5%. But if they just calculate it the exact same way that they calculated before the 90s, it's around 20%. So that's a much more realistic number. If you actually look at the amount of the percentage of the population who is in the workforce, that number has been going down since, I believe, 2000 steadily. So that is a much better number to look at. And as you pointed out, because of all this money printing from quantitative easing from the Federal Reserve, from helicopter Ben Bernanke and old lady Janet Yellen with Alzheimer's or whatever she appears to have, the amount of the money printing actually causes a lot of the. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What were we just talking about jobs?
About jobs, yeah. About these numbers, yeah. We're on the up and up. It's the same here in England. But just to echo what you're saying, in England, they're basing these figures on people taking what are called 0 hours contracts jobs. I don't know if they exist in the United States, but here they get people off the unemployed registers. They sign to work with a company, but that company doesn't guarantee them 40 hours a week work. It might give them 8 hours or 10 hours or 15 hours, and the rest of the time they'll have to get benefits. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, sorry, I just remembered what I was going to say is that through all this money printing, the they actually say they create jobs, and that's government can never truly create jobs because government actually doesn't produce anything. Government just is an extortion racket. The only difference between mafia and government is size, and all they do is take people's money. That's all they do. They definitely don't produce anything, and so by doing that, they can print money, and that they say creates jobs, but by printing money, they're actually throwing off all the price signals in the economy, and that's what creates all these bubbles. So, for example, the tech bubble in the late 90s, or the housing bubble in the mid 2000s, or the current government bond debt bubble, were all created by printing money. And so if you look at the housing bubble, for example, in the U.S., so entrepreneurs were out there. They lowered the interest rates, which is price fixing the price of money, essentially manipulating the market, which is illegal for anyone else to do except for the central bank. So they bring the interest rates down. This tells a lot of people, okay, we can borrow money. The economy must be doing well. And because they print money, they say, oh, there seems to be quite a bit of money around. So people want things. They want houses and things like that. So let's build them all. So that's what they did in the U.S. And this is actually what Paul Krugman wanted from the New York Times. And so they build literally millions of houses that aren't needed. And now they sit empty in a country with a lot of homeless people, which is exactly what Thomas Jefferson said. If you ever allowed a central bank to exist in the U.S., you will wake up homeless in the country that your forefathers founded. And that's exactly what's happening.
Loads of questions on this. A lot of them complimentary. A lot of comments are complimentary. One or two criticisms. We'll get to the criticisms first, then we'll get into the complimentary ones.
I'm used to the criticism.
I know you are. Yeah. But listen, but that's why you're here. And I think when you and I spoke off air last time, you've got the same philosophy as David Icke. If an idea is a good idea, it'll stand up to any scrutiny, and you shouldn't fear questioning. And I know you don't, but we get people who refuse to come on this program because they don't want to be questioned. And I say, well, why? I'm not rude. I'm not going to be rude. I'm not Bill O'Reilly. I'm not going to shout at you. If the idea is any good, come on and take the questions. Oh, no, I'm not going to do it. And that's the way it is. The order. I used to like Jeff says the order on Twitter. You can see these tweets on my Twitter page. I used to like Jeff. But basically, he wants freedom, anarchy for the wealthy and screw the poor. I now see his true colours. You're not saying that, though.
No, I want freedom for everybody. Now, what this person's saying is often what a lot of people think because they've been brainwashed by the mainstream media and government television programming, which is called programming for a reason, that capitalism creates this uber rich class that take advantage of the workers or the laborers. And this is where all the Marxists and communists still have this crazy idea that that's exactly how it works. And they think that we need government to control free markets or else it'll get crazy. Well, look at what happens with the government and the central banks. It creates all these problems they say they're there to solve. So a lot of people seem to think that if you're advocating for free markets, and by free markets, all I mean is voluntary trade between two parties. Now, if this person isn't for that, then this person is immoral and should be ashamed of themselves. They're a thief, they're a robber, they at least support robbery and theft. So I'm glad this person isn't my neighbor. But they're just confused, I think. They think that with free markets that the wealthy get more wealthy and the poor get totally enslaved, when that's exactly what happens in all governments, whether it be communist like China was or the Soviet Union or the U.S. today. or if it's fascist, like in more like Germany, Nazi Germany, or like the U.S. today. The U.S. is essentially fascist communist. You have those things happen.
Jeff, help me
when
out
you actually
here.
have a free market, you don't.
Help me out here, because you know I don't agree with this. You and I had a really good debate about this last time you were on, and there's no point in us going over old ground because we've got new things to discuss, and I have questions from listeners. You know I don't believe this, Jeff. I hear everything you're saying about governments and the tyrannical nature of power and governments and what it's done, the central banks, the printing of money. I reckon we agree on 90% of everything. But look, what you're advocating scares the hell out of me, and I'll tell you why. You can't allow entrepreneurs, businessmen, women, product creators run amok without being regulated, Jeff. You can't. Because you have to protect those who work for them. You have to protect the environment. You have to protect the air that we breathe. You have to abide by the law. People listening to this, and I'm one of them, listen to what you're saying. It sounds fantastic. But what we hear capitalists able to run amok in that system and do whatever the hell they want, regardless of the consequences of it, in terms of to the environment or to other people. Now, explain to me why I'm wrong when I get that from your theory.
Well, just look at the world today. Isn't that happening in the world today? Isn't the environment being destroyed? We have governments everywhere. Aren't there?
Yeah, but it's not because of the governments, Jeff. Hang on a second. It's not because of the government. It's because of dirty, filthy, corrupt politicians whom are bribed through the lobby system by the very bloody companies that we're talking about, surely.
Exactly. So if government didn't exist, there'd be no one to bribe. And then they would not be able to do many of the things they can.
But who would stop them,
Jeff? The market.
How would the market stop them doing that? Let's just talk about a situation in Flint, Michigan now, where people are being poisoned by lead.
By the government.
Listen, absolutely right, caused by the government, right? But we've seen other situations like that where massive petrochemical companies or pharmaceutical companies have poisoned the environment and the water, and it's caused catastrophe in communities because they were able to subvert the rule of law by buying congressmen and women and senators. With that out of the way, Jeff, and he wouldn't have to buy them, are you asking me to believe that by their intrinsic good nature that they would just behave themselves?
Well, I think, no, definitely I'm not saying that by their good nature they would behave themselves, but I'm saying the market would restrain them to a great extent. As well, a lot of these problems that you're identifying is because of what's called the tragedy of the commons. So when you have something like the oceans or roads or whatever it is that is supposedly owned by everyone but not really owned by anyone, that's when things really get destroyed. If there was actually private property and people could own certain areas, they take very good care of those things. People take care of things that they own. And so, for example, in Flint, Michigan, so this is caused by the government, as you pointed out, allowing them to do these certain things. These things get very complex. Let me point out that the world is a very volatile place. This is bad things happen no matter what. Even if we have free markets, bad things are definitely, absolutely, I guarantee it, going to happen. But it's really enabled by governments a lot more. To give you an example, I'm trying to think of an example of, well, just look at the more private market, right? Does Evian have, poison in their water? Does Voss have poison in their water? No, because if they did, no one would ever buy it again, and it'd be out of business in no time, absolutely no time.
Yes, but we shouldn't have to buy water. Water is a human right.
Oh, of course you should have to buy water. What is your right to anything? You should have to. So you're claiming the right to make other people work for you to go get you some water and bring it to you. You're claiming you should never have to do anything. You shouldn't even have to get out of bed, and someone should be forced to do that for you.
Well, we're not talking about forcing anybody. I've always believed.
Yes, you are.
Well, hang on a second now, Jeff.
When you're saying it's a right, what do you mean by that?
Because I tell my listeners all the time, I've got to come clean here, because I tell my listeners all the time I don't believe in democracy. I don't believe in democracy as we have it. We don't have representatives who represent us. We have representatives who are chosen for us by enormous private interests who go to work for those enormous private interests. When they get elected, they don't work for us. That's what we have. In an ideal world, to make it illegal for private interests to own politicians, narrow the amount of time that politicians can spend in government, get more representatives, Jeff, who actually are more like us in terms of that they're not multimillionaires or billionaires, and set them to work. And at the very basic, how do I say this? Basically, Jeff, I've always believed that the state, the representatives, the people elected to represent us, that at the very least their job is to provide water, light, heat. I would even go as far as to say food for its citizens. I've always believed that.
But how are they going to get that for its citizens?
What do you mean, how are they going to get it?
Well, you say that they're supposed to provide it. So Barack Obama, under what you're thinking,
well, forget
is
Obama.
Supposed to give you food.
Well,
where does he get the food?
Well, imagine we had a system where there were no central banks, there was no Federal Reserve, there was no Bank of England. Imagine we had a system where elected men and women actually were working for the betterment of the environment and the people who live in it. Imagine that for a minute. And they had control over the money supply. Basically.
Well, I wouldn't want anyone to have control over the money supply. That's the whole problem. The money supply should stay constant. There shouldn't be any finagling with the money supply. That's why Bitcoin's so good. But you have to really think this through, Richie. If the government is, you think, should provide all the food, healthcare, and water for people, where does it get it?
Ideally, Jeff. Ideally, in an ideal world.
No,
I think basic human rights.
If they did that, where would they get it?
Your basic human right.
Answer the question.
I'll answer the question in a second. I'm going to do a politician thing now. As far as I'm concerned, everybody has the basic right to live, to have what it needs to live and survive on the planet, and it should be provided to them by those whom they elect to run, whether it's their city or their country.
So you're saying the politicians should be out in the fields farming the food?
No,
and
I'm
stuff?
not.
I don't. Where are they getting this from to give to the people?
I'm not, but I'm saying that they should provide the means to do that. And if the government of the day, listen, we could talk all day about Nixon.
Let me answer the question for you, okay? Because I don't think you're getting it. The government doesn't produce anything. The only reason governments have money today is two reasons. One is they tax people, so they steal it from people. So that's one way that you could have your fantasy world.
It's not a fantasy world because if you issue debt-free currency to a population, Jeff, if you issue debt-free currency,
that would help tremendously.
Yes,
that would restrain governments massively. Absolutely,
which is what I'm saying. I'm saying that if governments were to issue debt-free currency, there wouldn't be any need for taxation, Jeff. It's been suggested on this program before that if you want the taxation, you could have a 1% charge on every transaction made amongst whether it's between two businesses or two private citizens, and that would bring in all sorts of money to fund the state. We agree on a lot, Jeff, but to me, this idea of allowing wealthy entrepreneurs and capitalists to do whatever they want, and that somehow that free market capitalism, as you've described it, would lead to some sort of utopia and a system or a way of life that's better than now.
Utopia.
No, you've never said utopia. No, you haven't. But the fact that it would be better than what we have now, I just can't see it, Jeff.
Definitely.
Why?
Well, that's what we have right now, right? You would agree with that the wealthy people control everything. They can do anything they want right now under the current system, right?
Right. And they're going to somehow,
so I'm saying,
and they're going to grow more.
They wouldn't be able to do it as much if we didn't have government, because government enables a lot of these things.
They have, yeah, but perverted by the same businesses and the same entrepreneurs that we're talking about. I'm the first to admit.
For example, like Monsanto, right? Monsanto, if you're against Monsanto, and I'm no expert on GMOs and things like that, but it does appear like they're creating really dangerous, poisonous things. They wouldn't survive in a free market system. And what they're doing under the current system is they buy the governments, which is what has been done since the very beginning of governments, and it's just human nature, I think, to do that. And the government puts in a law and says you can't plant anything but Monsanto seeds in this particular area. And if you do, we'll arrest you for intellectual property rights or whatever. If there was no government, Monsanto couldn't force every farmer in the world to use their seeds. So that's why I'm saying it would be better without government.
Listen, I couldn't argue with that point. And of course, you being as smart as you are, and I'm not patronising it, you can throw all of these examples, and I can't argue with that 100%. But that's one example, Jeff. That's one example. You haven't addressed
I could do it on every example.
But you haven't. But you've not addressed. You've said that. Things will work. You're basically saying things will work out. What about the protections, Jeff, of the people who work for these companies? Who's going to look out for them?
That's the easiest answer.
How?
That's the easiest answer. The market. Okay, so if you have two factories, right? Let's say they're both big companies and they both make T-shirts, or let's say something important like food. They both make all the food. Two companies. If one of the companies is really being horrible with their workers, those workers are going to leave and go to the other company. Now that actually makes the company who was really bad, they're going to have worse workers. They're going to go down in value. They're not going to be as productive, and they're going to have to change. The market always forces change because there's competition. And the big thing with governments is they restrict competition through things like monopolies, which we see all over the place, and through things like intellectual property and patents. And all sorts of things. That's why Walmart actually is a big supporter of a lot of government regulation. The reason is because it makes the bar of entry to compete with Walmart so massive that hardly anyone can. So they put in all these regulations and rules and all those sort of things, and it makes it so people can't compete. Whereas if there wasn't those things, you could start up beside a Walmart. If you can offer a cheaper product, you'll get all the business.
Right.
And it's works a lot better.
Again, I can't argue with that. But let's look at Company A and Company B. What's the stop in your system, Company A? And I want to drop this in a sec. I don't want to keep winding you up, and I do want to put some listeners' questions to you. What's to stop Company A reverting to all manner of malevolent tactics to subvert its competition? What's to stop that? I'm talking about sabotage, Jeff. I'm talking about bribing people, maybe bribing people who work for Company B, all this sort of stuff. Who's going to stop that? I mean, this idea that companies will just play fair and the best company and the company who offers the cheapest and the best product will win outside of government regulation. It still doesn't add up, Jeff. You're forgetting the basic fundamental human greed.
Think about it this way. Greed exists, and that's why we should get rid of government, because it's so dangerous that all the greediest people gravitate towards it, all the sociopaths. Think about it this way. If there's McDonald's and Burger King in the world, right? And McDonald's is like blowing up Burger Kings all the time, people are going to notice that, and they're going to say, I'm not going to eat at McDonald's anymore. These guys are massive criminals. They're terrorists. The market sorts things out.
But they're getting rid of their competition.
If people are standing outside, if the McDonald's CEO is standing outside of McDonald's with a gun forcing people to eat at McDonald's, that place wouldn't be around very long.
I'm going to argue with you, Jeff. I'm going to argue with you because you mentioned McDonald's, so you brought McDonald's into the conversation, so I'm going to argue with you. You say is that if McDonald's was doing this and that, people would go to Burger King or vice versa. But Jeff, most educated people like us who do a bit of reading and read the papers, they know damn well what sort of a company McDonald's is, and they know damn well what sort of a company Coca-Cola is and what they've been involved in historically. I mean, we're talking about companies who've had, they've had their hand in coups and military coups and in all sorts of stuff, and yet people still use them anyway.
Well, actually, less and less. This is actually a big change, Richie, and I think you obviously have recognized this over the last 15, 20 years, thanks to the internet. Before the internet, when the press was all controlled, the mainstream media controlled all the what people knew, you could do a lot of things like that. But now as people find out about them, businesses go out of business very quickly when they find out that they're doing certain things. Like McDonald's almost went out of business after one guy made a documentary called Super Size Me, and almost went out of business one of those companies almost went out of business when it was exposed what they were doing to some of the animals in their factory farming. Yeah. So once again, Again, those businesses are doing this under this state-controlled system right now.
Jeff, what's to stop the guy who owns Factory A buying Factory B, C, and D and creating a monopoly? Nothing in the system that you're proposing assures me that we won't end up with monopolies like we have now. And this is something that governments are supposed to prevent. You see, when Rupert Murdoch wanted to
Right,
buy,
they're supposed to, but
they
government
don't.
is
No,
the
because
biggest
they're
monopoly in the world.
yes, but because they're bribed and because they're owned by the people who want the monopoly. So without regulation, Jeff, if I had a company, you had a company, you can come in and go, Richie, get out of business. I've had enough of you now. Here's 15 million bucks. Get out of here. And I'll go, yeah, thanks, Jeff. Absolutely lovely. I'm off to Acapulco. Where's the good in that for the punter, for the customer?
Well, let's name a product so we can talk about a scenario. So let's, so someone's going to take over the entire clothing business. Is this what? So some company buys up the Gap and every other retail clothing store. They buy up every factory that creates clothes. At some point the market's going to say, I don't really like all this company, and then someone will start up another company, and they'll say, hey, this is a new one. This one isn't like all the same like the other one, and they're offering a better product over there. I'll go there. That's it. That's the end of it. The market regulates itself. I'm going to recommend a book to you, Richie, and it's super short. You can actually get it for free on the internet. And if you read it in about a couple hours, and if you read that book, I think you would totally understand where I'm getting at. It's called The Market for Liberty. If you just look it up, just type in The Market for Liberty on Google, you'll find a PDF. It explains all these scenarios and how they would work out, and it makes total sense. I'm not saying it'd be perfect. That absolutely nothing in life is perfect, but it would be better than it is today. And so a second point, if we did have a world without central banks, with governments that were much more regulated, the governments are what needs to be regulated, not the market. If the governments were much more constrained and regulated, I'd be much happier. And that's what you're essentially saying you want. And if, things like democracy, they should have all the votes be done online, and everyone votes. There shouldn't be congressmen or senators or anything like that. It should be direct democracy at the very least. That would be better. I'd support that totally. And in fact, if you could get the government small enough and you can get rid of central banks, I probably wouldn't even talk about anarchy anymore. I'd be off doing other things.
Jeff, I'll read a couple of comments out. Rennie agrees with you. A very patronising comment from Rennie. How you doing, Rennie? My dear Richie, that's lovely. Don't confuse rights that a person may have with obligations of other persons or bodies to realise them. My dearest Rennie, we are the only species of life in the planet that has to pay to live. We are wage slaves. It is insane. The human being, the human experience should not have to be about working for somebody else to fucking eat. Sorry, Jeff, I'm not shouting at you. Do you understand that, Rennie? We shouldn't have to pay to live. Muppet. It's madness to me. Martin was on to say, Jeff seems to be unaware that imminently most jobs will be taken from people by robots or machines. How will people survive? This is a brilliant question, Jeff. I'll shut up and let you answer that. These companies are crazy. Who's going to buy their products in the long term,
Yeah, well, that's funny because you had two questions back to back. One person saying, we're all forced to work and to survive, which is terrible. We should be given everything by some entity.
It's not about being given everything, Jeff. There is enough on planet Earth, mate. There is enough food, water, air, land on planet Earth for everybody to live comfortably. We are the only life form on the planet that has boxed ourselves in to this ridiculous reality where we must go and work for some bastard in some factory for £7 an hour.
Well, you don't have to, Richie. You could go live in the woods and eat berries. You're not being forced to do it. But it's funny, though, because you have the one person saying you're forced to do all this stuff, and then you have the other person saying, oh, but we're not going to have to work anymore because of robots, and that's really bad. So people are really confused about this whole issue. And I agree with you totally that if it wasn't for government and central banks, this world would have so much prosperity that hardly anyone would really have to work very hard anymore. If you wanted to not work very hard, you could still survive just fine. There would be no starvation, no anything. Open up the borders. People could work wherever they want. It would just be, if you wanted to make more money for whatever reason, maybe you really want to buy a certain car or something, you could. And if you don't want to, you'd still be pretty good. It's this taxation and inflation and regulation that is constantly forcing people to have to work. Now, this other person who comes in and says, well, now robots are going to take all our jobs. What are we going to do? Well, that's actually a pretty good thing. If you look at back through human history, technology has always improved things. It was only a few hundred years ago that humans had to spend, I'm talking about 99% of humans, had to spend about 90% of their time just out in the fields making their own food just to survive. Now through technology, it's only about 2% or less than that of people who need to do that to supply all the food to everyone. So if we could get that down to 0% of the people need to work and we'd all have food, that sounds like a pretty good thing, right? But the thing is, with governments and central banks, the inflation will keep going up, and you soon won't be able to afford that food even made by robots. And the government will continue to put in all sorts of regulations and things like that to make it so you or charge you property tax on your property, which is absolutely ridiculous.
Listen,
so that you have to continue to work.
Yeah, look, they're utterly corrupt governments, every one of them. They're sickeningly corrupt, and I would argue the system is insane. It is. Lawrence is I love having you on, Jeff, by the way. I love a good argument. You're sincere in what you believe, and I love that. And I mean that, by the way. I'm not patronising you. Jeff says Lawrence is in South Africa. Lawrence is not happy with you, Jeff. Does Jeff believe that the homeless should die from thirst due to lack of money? Now, I don't think for a second that Jeff Berwick believes that at all. I don't believe it. But who's going to look after the intellectually challenged, Jeff, the disabled and the sick in this free market capitalist society? Who's going to take care of them?
Who's looking after them right now? They put up spikes in London so homeless people can't even sleep on the street. That's the government.
No, it's not the government doing that. Hang on a second. It's not. It's businesses doing that,
Okay.
Jeff. Come on now,
Okay,
Jeff. It's businesses
ignore
doing
that
it.
one then. Okay, if it's businesses, okay. But here's another good example. In the U.S., it's illegal to feed the homeless in many places. That's the government stopping people. They want to feed the homeless. A lot of people do. Just to answer the initial sort of comment, the reason that I believe so strongly in free markets is because I want to see the entire human race being incredibly prosperous. I don't want to see any starving people. I don't want to see any homeless people. A lot of socialists, for example, will look at a really expensive, nice house and say that person shouldn't be allowed to own that house. Whereas a more capitalist sort of person, a true capitalist, a true free market person will look at the house and say, I wish we had a system where everyone could own a house like that. And that's how I am. A lot of people get confused and they think the government is actually helping poor people. Government creates poor people. There would be no homeless people on the planet if there was no government. Most of the homeless people in the U.S. is because there's government regulations that they can't go out into the woods and build a tent and live there. There was a guy last year shot in Arizona.
Come on, Jeff. A lot of people who are on the streets because of addiction problems and because of mental health issues. I understand what you're saying. I just want to do a quick recap, Jeff, because we're flying through this as I knew we would. It's 16 minutes to the top of the hour. Jeff Berwick is on the show. We're about 60-40 on Twitter, 60 against what Jeff is saying and 40% in favour of it. That's not a scientific poll now, by the way. Go to $vigilante.com. That's where you'll find Jeff. Jeff is a Canadian entrepreneur. He's based in Acapulco now. Anarcho-Pulco takes place in February from the 19th to the 21st. Check out Vigilante for more on that. I believe Jeff Berwick is obviously a very, very smart guy who believes what it is he's saying. I don't believe he's any system plant or any of that nonsense. I really don't. He believes it. Just so happens that I don't agree with him. But that's the beauty of this type of democracy. We can have an open discussion about these things without screaming at one another and without killing one another.
Actually, it's not because of democracy that we can talk like this. We should all be able to talk like this.
Well, it's intelligence, isn't it? It's just basic intelligence. Yeah, you can
Right.
you can meet with people whom you disagree with. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, and we've probably got about 10 more minutes left, so I better get out of your way and talk about this financial collapse, Jeff, which some in the independent media believe will be a manufactured and a manipulated crash to bring about further austerity plans, which are going to take more and more money away from ordinary people and trickle it uphill to the so-called 1%. The dollar, Jeff. People asking me questions about should they be worried about their money in banks at the moment? Should they be worried about that? You know, should they take it out, Jeff? Should they put it somewhere else? What about this collapse that people think is coming this year?
Well, they should be absolutely worried. I write the Dollar Vigilante. I started in 2010, and I said within 5 to 10 years, all fiat currencies, that's all cash, all government currencies, will collapse. We just entered into the beginning of that the last year when I said it would start. I said in the summer that we were going to see a major crisis begin in the fall, and we saw that. The third quarter of 2015 was a massive stock market drops around the world. The European Union all of a sudden had their giant refugee crisis, which was all created by the powers that be. So they went in and they destroyed massive terrorist attacks they did in Syria and Libya. Hillary Clinton was just outed as one of her emails showed that the reason they went in and killed Muammar Gaddafi, which is a murder, is because he wanted to create a gold-backed African currency. And so they went in and bombed the crap out of that country, killed so many people, destroyed so many lives. The first day after they bombed it, they installed a central bank. So it's quite obvious what they're doing.
Yeah.
As far as keeping your money in the bank, what happened in Greece, what happened in Cyprus with the bank bail-ins, which is literally a daylight robbery. It used to be in the old days, Richie, that you'd rob the bank. Now the banks rob you.
The bail-ins, it's scandalous. Yeah, scandalous, Jeff, yeah.
The European Union just passed a bank bail-in legislation on January 1st of this year. They know what's coming. What happened in Cyprus, what happened in Greece is going to happen all throughout Europe. It, to some extent, is definitely a planned collapse. They've been planning this actually for decades to destroy Europe and the U.S. As they see those as sort of the last two places that could stand up to this one world order sort of a thing. And they will destroy it all. And the banks many of them will close. Many of them will take your funds. Many of them will just go bankrupt or insolvent. And at the same time, they'll inflate the currency until it's worthless. So absolutely, if you have savings of your money and you're holding it in paper currency, which is not backed by anything, and all it has is pictures of dead criminals printed on it, that is not a good place to hold your savings. You should be holding it in hard assets. Precious metals is a good one, especially at this time. It's such a great price in gold and silver right now. It's a total easy choice to take a lot of your money out of the bank and buy precious metals. If you can, they're making it a lot harder to do. And buy other things like hard assets, like real estate. Definitely get out of the financial system. It's all going to completely collapse in the next few years and possibly as early as this year.
Yeah, I echo that. I don't have your experience of working with the markets and understanding, how it works in the terms, Jeff. But I do, look at trends and I understand trends, and I see this happening as well in the free market society, in the free market capitalist society. Who would be responsible for issuing currency?
No one. No one would be responsible to do anything. You just do whatever you want. Currency in the past, often gold and silver. Now we have technology, so things like Bitcoin could easily become currency. In fact, even euro notes and US dollar notes could still be currency, even if the central banks were to completely close, and even if the US government and European government didn't exist. People, if they still thought it was of value, could use it. The worst thing you can possibly do is allow the government to decide what currency is to be used. And now we have nearly every country in the world actually making it so their citizens have to use that money. And of course, they have to use it because they're getting taxed, and they have to pay their taxes in that currency. That's what really provides the reason for most people having to use it. But the best thing with currency, just like everything else in the market, is to allow the market to decide what it wants to use. That is always the best way. And it's, funnily enough, before I knew about Bitcoin, which I found out about in 2011 at $3, it's currently at about $400, people would ask me, what are people going to use for currency once all the fiat currencies collapse? And I said, I don't know, but I'm sure the market will come up with something. And it wasn't too long after that I found out about Bitcoin, which is a creation of the market created in 2009. Just after the financial crisis, which just about destroyed the entire financial and monetary systems. And it was created by the market, and it can't be controlled by anyone. So the market always comes up with great solutions if you allow it to function.
But again, you have to have the currency that we use now. You have to have that to convert it into Bitcoin. How else would you get it?
Right, or you could
Yeah.
mine it, but that's what I'm saying is to convert your currency now while you can. I'm actually predicting, and I've said this many times over the last few years, that I expect at some point you won't be able to buy gold or silver. I'm not necessarily Bitcoin, but probably Bitcoin too, in exchange for your paper currency in the next
Yeah.
couple of years. And of course, they have the war on cash right now. They're trying to get rid of cash.
Of course they are,
because
massively.
they're going to negative interest rates. So as they do that, people will say, well, why should I keep my money in the bank? So they're going to try to get rid of cash. So it's very dangerous times to be holding fiat currencies, in my opinion.
Jeff, I got a few comments to read out. Then I've got a question from Martin for you. The Order was back on to say on Twitter, Richie, please tell Jeff I do believe in free market as well, but I don't like the idea that people who work hard need to work even harder, says the Order. Angela was on to say, governments only work for the banks. We need independent community teams that can work together without punch and Judy politics, says Angela. I'll read out a couple more of these, Jeff, because I'll get into trouble for not reading them out. Sean was on to say, what does Jeff think about the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, TTIP? I'm sure Jeff has an opinion on that. I don't know if we're going to get to it, Sean, but Jeff might come back on again.
I can answer in 10 seconds.
Go on, answer that, Jeff.
A free trade agreement should be one sentence long. It should say, we agree that these two countries will trade freely amongst each other. The TPP is bigger than the size of a phone book and incredibly classified because it's a complete fascist takeover. It is truly the corporations taking over the governments now.
Martin says, really important question. He says, how does Jeff pay for the roof over his head and for food, etc.?
I make money. If you're asking specifically, I write the Vigilante, which is a subscription newsletter. So we have thousands of subscribers around the world who pay for our information, which we provide an analysis and recommendations on investments and how to survive the coming collapse.
And by the way, the website to find out more, by the way, is $vigilante.com, $vigilante.com. Jeff, it's about two ideas, isn't it? It's about your idea, and it would appear that you've got a lot of support, for the markets to take control of the markets and of business, to get rid of regulation, to get rid of corrupt governments, and to take governments out of completely. And then you have what I believe in. I'm a dyed-in-the-wool socialist. I probably deep down still dream of a time when we can send people to whether it's to Dublin or to London or to DC, honourable people chosen by us, not to earn millions while they're doing it, and certainly not to be co-opted by corporations, but to just manage the essential parts of public life, to manage law and order. And yes, Jeff, to keep an eye on businesses getting out of control and doing things which hurt the environment or people. I believe in that. And you don't. I think there are merits to what both of us are saying, I think. I will always believe, Jeff, that
Well, the only difference between me and you is yours has been proven not to work and mine has never been proven because we've never tried it.
Well, you see, we've never tried my way either, my friend. We've never tried my way.
Yeah, that's always, yes, yeah. It's
well,
never
it's
been
true.
tried.
And I know you laugh at it, and privately you might mock it.
No,
but
I agree with you.
We've never tried
I've heard that before, is that it just hasn't been done well enough yet. But, after hundreds of years, at what point do we just say, okay, just get rid of the whole thing? It causes way more problems than it solves.
Yeah, I mean, and you're right to argue that, let's give what you propose a good go, and you're right to be nervous about what I propose, but I'm equally nervous about what it is that you're proposing. But I'm delighted that we can discuss it.
Again, though, the difference between us is though that you would want to force your thing on me because it would be an actual government, a socialist government, and I would never force my beliefs on you. You can go ahead and start a socialist government, just make sure that I'm not included.
No, I'm not trying to force my beliefs on anybody. What I'm saying is it must be right and proper that every human being born, every citizen of this country I'm living in and everywhere else is entitled to life, Jeff, and is entitled to the essentials of life. In my socialist government, I'm not talking about this nonsense that gets attributed to socialism all the time, this nonsense of, I want to tax you into oblivion. No, I do not, my friend. I'm happy for you to be a millionaire, for you to run your company, but I want you to pay your fair share, Jeff, in terms of taxation. I don't want to charge you 60 or 70% tax.
Well, you just said you don't want to force me to do it.
I don't. And in fact, I'm kind of contradicting myself, because what I'd like to see long term, and I'm always willing to put my hands up and admit I'm wrong. Yes, I am contradicting myself there slightly. What I would like to see is a 1% levy on all transactions. Never been tried either. That wouldn't be a bad idea, Jeff, would it? And then you can go and get as rich as you want.
What we have right now, absolutely.
Listen, I'll tell you what.
And then we just argue between 1% and 0%. That'd be the only argument left.
I'll give you the final word on this, my friend. You got 30 seconds, and I won't interrupt you, and I won't sum up after. I'll give you the final word because I've said plenty. 30 seconds, mate, and then we're out. Go ahead.
Well, actually, Richie, I've really enjoyed this discussion. That's all I really want to say. It's always great talking to you. You're very open-minded and open to debate. And I think we're both pretty much on the same team, 90, as you said, 90% of the way. And we can argue about the other 10% once we get rid of that 90%.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get rid of the tyrannical regime and the tyrannical system we have at the moment that's condemning us to endless wars and insanity. Jeff, I'm delighted you came back on. People go to $vigilante.com. There you'll find out more of the detail of what Jeff is talking about. So you'll get a chance to make up your mind more on what he's saying rather than this discussion where I keep interrupting him. But there were so many questions coming in, I had to do that. I look forward to talking to you again in the future, Jeff. I hope it's a successful event for you in Acapulco, February 19th through February the 21st. I'm sure it'll be huge and people will be able to find it online. As you said, bits of it will be put online for people to look at. Thanks, mate, for coming back on. Really enjoyed it. Look after yourself.
Thank you, Richie. Peace.
Bye for now. Jeff Berwick, the Dollar Vigilante, on the line to us there from Acapulco.